YCS Indianapolis has come and gone, and with it, the first major tournament of this Yu-Gi-Oh season and the first major event where Age of Overlord is legal. It feels like I haven't said this in ages, but ladies and gentlemen, I spent a good portion of my weekend watching the YCS livestream, feature matches, and catching up on the coverage so that you didn't have to. This is what the heck happened at YCS Indianapolis. For starters, this was a pretty big event, with the number coming in at 1,957 duelists, so basically a 2,000 person tournament, which for comparison would have been like putting YCS Cancun, Vancouver, and Sao Paulo all together. Historically, Indianapolis has been a great city for Shonen Jumps and YCS, so I personally think that it's pretty awesome to see that we got such a great number out of this event. Now for the important stuff: what topped, what flopped, the decks, the techs, crazy stuff that happened in feature matches, what ultimately won the event, what surprised us, and much more. Basically everything and in between. Some of my initial thoughts were that the first couple of feature matches weren't very good. It wasn't that Konami was featuring bad decks or had bad matchups. I think it was the players themselves. Maybe they weren't used to playing on stream, which is a quite different experience, or maybe they were just a little bit nervous, but I don't think the technical play was all that high for those first couple of matches. Players not knowing that they could draw a card for each copy of Sleepy Memory attached to a Purely Exceed, people trying to search while under their own Droll and Lockbird, or just flat out forgetting that illusion monsters can't be destroyed by battle. This all led to tons of misplays in the early rounds, which again wasn't all that great from a viewing experience. Round 3, for anyone who wants to go back and watch some of those feature matches, is where things started to get really good and we started to see that solid gameplay between the high-skilled duelists. This leads me to, of course, round 4, which featured high-profile player Justin Singh, someone who has topped numerous YCS, and I've actually dueled against him in the past, excellent player, and Old Man Jeff, the famous Mystic Mind Burn player who was often featured on Simo's channel, and quite frankly, this guy damn near broke the internet over this weekend. I've always thought of Jeff as a burn player through and through because his favorite card is Mystic Mind, and I just assumed that he was playing some sort of burn variant, but to my and I think everyone's surprise, he was playing an Exodia first turn kill deck featuring Infernoble and Ignites. Now, I was personally shocked by this. I'm not going to speak for everyone, but I had kind of typecast him as a stun player who really lived off of these grindy games where he slowly constricted the life out of his opponent and would often win, maybe turn 6, 7, 8 in the duel. But the deck he was playing was pretty much the complete opposite of that. This was a super explosive Exodia deck that was one of the most complicated and convoluted things that they showed on stream over the entire weekend, and to my surprise and complete shock, he pulled off Exodia twice in the duel, which, I mean, it set the crowd off, it set the internet off. It was absolutely amazing to watch. I'll try not to go into absolute full detail and spoil it for anyone who wants to see all the inner workings of the combo and how he pulls it off, especially in game 3, which kind of came in a really shocking manner how that duel ultimately did play out. This was something that reverberated through the entire Yu-Gi-Oh community after it happened. There were tons of tweets about this. There were people talking about it on Reddit and Facebook and pretty much every single social media platform. It was trending. Well, Exodia was actually trending on Twitter, and there have been people making TikToks and stuff about it as well. So it's something that kind of took over the internet for a hot little moment, especially considering that, it was something that people really didn't expect. I mean, you can watch YCSs for years and never see Exodia featured in a feature match, especially considering that it was 2 undefeated players who, Jeff was 3-0 at that time. Jeff was 4-0 after that feature match. However, he did lose his next 3 rounds, so unfortunately he was not able to make day 2 or the top 32 cut. However, I would not be shocked at all if this does translate into a lot of people experimenting with Exodia and trying to imitate the combos he was pulling off. So if you're someone who plays on Dueling Book or Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel, just understand over the next week or so, you might run into a lot of Exodia players, just people who are like, wait a minute, that guy was playing Exodia and he was undefeated at one point. Let me pick that up and see if I can pull that off. Just understand the Exodia players might be out there. For what else was trending? Well, SP Little Knight was expected unexpectedly everywhere. I watched almost every single feature round of the entire live stream, and I can say that she was summoned in nearly every round that they showed. Purely, Tier Element, Vanadium, Unchained, Rescue Ace, just as we all thought, basically every deck that can link summon not only played this card, but summoned her as well. I'd say without a doubt that she definitely was living up to the hype and pretty much her $80 price tag. On the other side of the spectrum, the Horus engine wasn't so hot. While it was seen in some feature matches being played in Tier Element or Tierlement, because people hate the way that I pronounce that word, a lot of the highest placing tier duelists such as multi YCS winner Apollo Gonclaves, who was actually the highest pacing player with the deck with a top 8 finish, he didn't use the Horus engine at all. Now, the Horus cards did actually show up in some other places, like a Bestial Horus deck that did make top 16, so it's not all completely bad when it comes to Horus. Other cards that were incredibly popular at the event, Droll and Lockbird and Forbidden Droplet. I've talked about Forbidden Droplet as a solid disruption card that is finally playable again because Arise Heart is banned and out of the game. I think this card was super popular because it's just a solid option that can be used offensively and defensively, whether you're going first or second. Like, it's one of the most versatile cards we have in the game. Droll was also super popular. A lot of people were main decking it. I thought that this was pretty surprising because there are decks in the meta like Purely or Rescue Ace, even some of the rogue ones that maybe you might run into like Salamangreat, that can activate their primary search cards or effects during the draw phase, which can obviously hurt and minimize Droll's effectiveness. There was a surprising amount of low impact hand traps being used. And a lot of the feature matches that I was watching, Effect Veiler is a card that, I mean, let's be real, I thought this card was completely dead, and yet a ton of Rescue Ace players were just main decking Effect Veiler, or they were playing it in general, including the ultimate winner of this tournament, who I believe was playing 3 copies of it. Infinite Impermanence was also wildly popular. Those are cards that can be really good against Rescue Ace and Purely, but I didn't think that they'd be that popular because they're not known as the strongest cards against the bigger combo decks like Tierlement. So I think it's interesting that people are just bringing them back so heavily into their decks. When it comes to the top 32, I think there were 2 major takeaways. Number 1, we may have just entered the OCG metagame because Rescue Ace showed up, showed out, and straight up dominated with 12 players in the top cut, 11 of which were using the Diabella Star engine. I put Rescue Ace as my second best deck of the format post Agave in my top 5 video, and I did say, well, almost verbatim, that I was either going to look brilliant or like a moron in a month. And at this point, it's looking like maybe I put the deck too low because it appears that I somehow underestimated it, as the Dark Witch and the Wanted poster have majorly fixed the consistency problems that have really plagued the Rescue Ace deck in the past. Second major takeaway relates to the sheer amount of decks that we saw in that top 32 cut. Rescue Ace, Purely, Tier Element, Vanadium, Unchained, Sprite, and actually 2 different versions of Sprite, Bestial, Horus, Fluunderies, Vanquish Soul, Labyrinth, Rika, Exo Sister, and Runic. So even if you don't count the Sprite as I guess like 2 different decks, that is a whopping 13 different themes that were able to top. Right now, there is literally over a dozen decks that you can take to a YCS and you can actually make day 2 or make that top 32 cut. While I personally love diversity out of a Yu-Gi-Oh format, and I think it's really awesome when you can take, 10 different decks and potentially make a top 32 at a YCS, this does bring up a bigger discussion because there were a lot of people complaining on social media about how having so many decks in a format actually makes it less enjoyable, but I think I'll talk about that in a different discussion on another day. When it comes to the overperformers and the underperformers, I think that Tier Element, and as much as it pains me to say this, Vanquish Soul definitely underperformed. I had Vanquish Soul and Tier Element as the 5th and best deck overall of the format respectively, and neither performed as such, with Vanquish Soul only putting a single player in the top 32, while Tier had 3, despite being far and away the most popular deck on platforms like Dueling Book over the past 2 weeks. I think that Tier arguably had the biggest target on its back going into this event, and maybe maybe you can say that that accounts for some of its poor performance. I mean, it only got to the top 8. I think that it was the favorite going into this event to ultimately win, so I do consider it an underperformer. On the other side, Rescue Ace, Vanadium, and Purely were definitely the big winners of the weekend in my opinion. As mentioned earlier, I think Rescue Ace just absolutely dominated this event. The top cut and even the finals was a Rescue Ace mirror match with YCS champion Steven Santoli, who feels like he's kind of come on hot over like the last year. This is his second YCS win. He also won one earlier with Exo Sister of all things, so the dude's kind of been on fire. He took down the entire event. Purely also cemented itself as a top 5 deck in my opinion, with 4 players in the top 32. Purely made it to the semifinals, so definitely a solid showing. And then there was Vanadium, which had a phenomenal weekend. For anyone who didn't watch my top 5 decks of the meta post Agave, I put Vanadium as an honorable mention, strictly based on Steven Trifanowski, aka my bro Triff Gaming. Vanadium got 2 players in the top 8, including Triff himself and YCS champion Hani Jawari, so Vanadium did phenomenally over the weekend, and I think that there is actually an argument that Vanadium could be considered the best combo deck of the metagame right now, slightly above Tier Element. So I think that we learned a ton from Indy. I think that Agave has obviously changed the metagame. Cards like SP Little Knights and the Diabella Star engine have just been leading the way, but I do think that there is still room for the Horus engine and maybe some of the other themes, because there is a lot of stuff that has potential in Age of Overlord. We're just scratching the surface. This of course is really just the first week that the set has been fully legal, and I definitely want to see where things are going to go. There is another YCS coming up in Richmond, Virginia in just a couple of weeks. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. I will try to do one for Richmond. I'm just not certain that I'm going to be able to do a Richmond recap, because I am going to be attending that event, but I'll do my best. Well, I guess if you guys enjoy the video, if nobody watches this, then ultimately it won't even matter. Anyways, let me know what you thought of the event. Leave any of your comments in the comment section below. Thank you guys for watching as always.